My name's Randy Rubenstein, and welcome to the Mastermind Parenting Podcast. At Mastermind Parenting, we're on a mission to support strong-willed kids and the families that love them. Hi, everyone. I am here this week with Mike Dimartino, and the amazing Avery Rubenstein is back again.
Hi.
Here she is. And we are going to be talking, this is going to be an episode for parents, pretty much for all of you, because if you have little kids, then you can be preparing for when your little kids become bigger kids. And if you have bigger kids, if you have teenagers, if you have tweens, Mike is here. He's going to teach us a masterclass on how to have hard conversations with our kids and talk about topics that are, I think, quite often difficult to broach. But when we incorporate stories and characters and sort of use them as a bridge, it becomes a tool for us to have more productive and honest conversations with our kids. So I'm really excited to have Mike on because he has created all kinds of iconic shows and been a part of really, really amazing bodies of work. Like he was the co-creator of the Avatar universe. All three of my kids, their favorite series of all time, I have found out: Avatar, The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, so many beloved Nickelodeon shows. He's got a resume a mile long, and now he is writing novels for young adults and really covering some intense themes. And so I wanted to have Mike on because I want to talk about all the things. So thank you for being here today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. Great to talk to you.
So the fact that the three of my kids have been huge fans of your work, down to the point that what my younger son, what did he announce like a year or two ago? He said, he announced to his siblings, "Oh, hey guys, I went ahead and bought," what did he buy, Avery?
I think he bought a season of Avatar. It was before it was on. It was like they hadn't released it on Netflix yet.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think it was on Crunchyroll or anything. And he
couldn't wait. He couldn't wait.
I can't be deprived anymore. I have to buy. And so he bought a whole season of it on Amazon.
And I was like, what are you doing, Corey? Like, come on. We have every platform, every streaming service. Like, you're going up. He's like, Mom, you don't understand. He doubled down. He defended it. He was like, you don't understand. And then both of his siblings were like, oh, that's awesome. You bought that. It's so awesome. Now we own it. So like, they're such a fan of your work. So
that's
there's
amazing.
that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, we created that show over 20 years ago now. So that back in the day, they would release these things called DVDs, and people would go out and buy DVDs of the show. Once it aired, we'd release like these box sets of each season. There's still people who buy them and collect them, but now it's all on streaming. And yeah, he must have been right in that period. There was like kind of a gap between like the DVD era and then before it was on Netflix, and there was this little area where it was harder to get, I think. So he
was the first of us to be brave enough. Yeah.
Well, I asked him yesterday. I said it seems like y'all all have been into this show like more as like young adults, like older teenagers, young adults. And Corey's like, no. The first time I ever watched Avatar Last Airbender was when I was about 10. I've just watched it a lot of times, and it never gets old. Like, it never stops delivering. And so Avery, when I never watched it, my kids just loved it. And now I realized it was kind of a missed opportunity because they loved it so much. I could have been bonding with them over all of the stories and the characters. Yeah. But Avery, what did you say when I said, why did y'all love this show so much?
I think because it stays compelling like through every age, because when you're young, it's just like kind of a beautiful story, like the animation is gorgeous. It captures your attention. It makes you feel things. And then as you get older, it's like all these deep themes of like loss and like the overwhelm of anger and like these beautiful character arcs. Something about it just like gives you hope for humanity. Like that's what my brothers and I always talk about. We're like, oh my God, like Avatar just like has so much social commentary. And you get so connected to the characters. I don't know how you do it, but like each of the characters just draws you in and you want to know their story. And it was pretty sad when it ended because you're like, what happens?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's amazing over the years. We've done Comic Cons and met fans and stuff over the years, and it is remarkable how many families come up to us who have watched it together, or siblings who have they can't agree on anything, but they agree on Avatar: The Last Airbender is awesome, and we watch it together,
Mm-hmm.
or a grandmother who watches it with their grandchild. So it's very satisfying to hear that it connects with so many people of different ages. And that was one of our goals, my friend Brian and I, when we created it, was we were trying to make something that we would enjoy, that we wanted to work on, that we were excited to create, but then also something that would last. Something that wasn't just a there's great shows out there, but you watch them once and you move on with your life. But yeah, there's
Right.
something about the show that people will watch it again and again. They know the story, but it's still, I think it is the emotional themes, like you said, and the characters that
Mm-hmm.
people want to come back and kind of re-experience the journey. It's also, it's a classic hero's journey kind of mythology. So like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, like you can take those journeys over and over. And, I'll watch Lord of the Rings. That's probably one movie I've watched a bunch of times, and
Me
Star
too.
Wars as well. I think those kind of mythological journeys also lend themselves to like rewatching and re-experiencing as a viewer
Right.
or a reader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's me with Game of Thrones as well.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Mm-hmm.
When you guys decided, when you started creating it, what was the initial, like, what did you say? Like, hey, let's make a show or let's write a story about what?
Yeah, it's a funny origin story because, you know, I was working in animation. I went to art school at Rhode Island School of Design, graduated and moved to LA to get into the animation industry. I worked on some other animated shows for a while, but I always, one of my dreams was to create my own show. And my friend Brian, who I'd met at art school, similarly wanted to do that as well. So we were kind of like, kind of on the side from our day jobs, like trying to figure out like what we wanted to do, what kind of show we could create. And then we kind of had this opportunity through Nickelodeon and the development executive there who, during a meeting, they kind of told us what they were looking for. So it wasn't that we had this idea stewing for years and years and we were like trying to get it made and knocking on a million doors. It kind of came to us as an assignment. Um, so I like to tell people that because sometimes people think you have to have like the grandest idea ever for years and years for it to pay off. But in this case, it really was like someone giving you a prompt almost of like, so they were looking for something like a Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, legends, lore, mythology with action. And at the time, we were watching Miyazaki's movies, like Spirited Away and Princess
Mhm.
Mononoke, those kind of Japanese films, and we're super inspired by those. So we were kind of combining all our interests in martial arts, in like I said, like mythology, anime, those kind of things, and kind of came up with our own version of like what could an action show be that uses what are the other like kind of parameters we had to work with was like we want to have an action show, they said, but it can't be like superheroes punching each other in the face because this is Nickelodeon for kids. So it was like, okay, how can we have action that's not like super violent or super imitable? That's a big thing for kids TV is like, oh, they can't, has to be something that kids can't readily imitate in their living rooms. So we using martial arts and the idea of martial arts and adapting it with like the idea of bending. So the characters in the show bend the elements. So that puts distance between the characters, and then you can still have these like super dynamic action scenes, but it's fantasy. It's people are bending the elements. So
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's Do you think that like it's why like the draw to the genre of Japanese cartoon culture, right? I know that's probably not the way of saying it, but like my younger son has told me, I've said like, why do you love anime so much? And he's like, it's deep, mom. It's
Yeah,
dramatic and it's deep. And so, like, did you feel like when you were creating this story and this series that it was like there's a real moment to bring more depth into these shows? Like, was that, even the hero's journey, like, how are we going to approach this? It
yeah.
seems like there's a lot of depth and soul involved.
Definitely, we put all our heart and soul into these things, and yeah, I think there is a cultural difference. The history of comics and animation in the West versus in Japan, which so over there, I mean, when we were starting the show, it was harder to get your hands on anime. Like there might be some DVDs. So one show that we loved was Cowboy Bebop. That was a big influence. But there wasn't Crunchyroll. There weren't all these like there wasn't Netflix showing all these amazing anime shows. Um, but yeah, I think the one big difference is like in the West, I grew up with Disney and Nickelodeon cartoons, and it's a very or Warner Brothers, like it's a very in a lot of cases silly or goofy or Disney's its own genre, fairy tale kind of storytelling. Whereas I think in especially in Japan, like there was just this history of like there was comics for everyone. There's an anime for there's like preschoolers up through like adult comics about you know the business world or there's a lot of sports comics, those kind of things. So I think there was just a wider range of things of what was possible in comics and animation in Japan, and we were as much as I was like grew up on Disney and stuff, like when once we saw Miyazaki's movies, those were kind of like a big light bulb moment where it was like, oh, I kind of get this storytelling. Like it's a little bit different visual style, and then also storytelling style, more mysticism, spirituality, that sort of thing. So we wanted to infuse some of that into the show as well.
Disney shows are like, I don't know, Avery, what would you say? Like it's more like good, evil. It's simpler
Yeah,
and then
there's less gray area between villain and good guy. I think that's also a big draw of the Avatar and Korra stories is like there is a middle ground and people can change. And I feel like that's not super common in shows that were created for little kids.
No, that's a
Um,
great point. I mean, that's one thing we always go back to is like that's one of our mantras. It's like it's not good versus evil. It's people who are in balance or out of balance with themselves, or
mhm.
societies that are in or out of balance with themselves. So the
Yeah,
idea of the avatar, this mythical character in our series, is like they are the one who is supposed to help navigate this world and bring balance to these different nations and different peoples, and then often they are out of balance in some way and have to kind of figure out their own personal journey and stuff. But yeah, I think that's a great observation.
right. Yeah, and it wasn't even because I feel like in a lot of shows it would be like this character created to save the world once they've reached that enlightenment. They're this all-knowing, beautiful, perfect, being. But like even like Avatar Kyoshi had evil in her when she would show
Right.
up and help Aang and whatnot. And like at the end, like Fire Lord Ozai, like he felt fear and he was confused by Aang's kindness. Like there's these multiple layers to the characters that I thought was just so beautiful. I do have a question about you said Nickelodeon, you had to kind of curb the violence. And I was wondering, in terms of like all the themes you have about reincarnation and life after death, how much of that was to kind of soften the blow of death for kids, and how much is that your personal beliefs and like what you brought into the show?
That was just part of drawing on like kind of Eastern philosophy and Eastern cultures
Hmm.
and stuff. Wasn't necessarily to soften the blow, but yeah, the idea of like even saying the word death in kids shows, often you get notes of like, can we say they were destroyed, or you have to
Right.
sometimes skirt the issue a little bit. So, but for the most part, like we always say, like that was the show you see is 99% what we set out to create. Like, there were a couple compromises along the way, but in a funny way, Nickelodeon, because it was so different than what had typically been on Nickelodeon, especially at that time, they kind of didn't know what to do with us. So they sort of left us alone, and they were like, people seem to like the show. It looks cool and it's connecting with audiences. So they, let us do our thing. So that was quite remarkable, especially in the Hollywood world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you draw from those themes in your new book, both Here and Gone? Because I noticed, without any spoilers, there is that theme of reincarnation and life after death. How much of that was inspired by Avatar and Korra?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I always think of these projects as very separate, but then when I start talking about the different things I've worked on, you start to see these like threads through your work,
Mm-hmm.
that you maybe initially weren't super conscious of. Obviously, yeah, my new book is like deals with a lot about grief and loss, and it's about a kid who's going through a bunch of different losses in his life and trying to learn how to navigate it and cope, um, as well as his community around him. But I think certainly the shows and this book, there's a lot of loss, a lot of grief. I mean, Aang, the hero of the show, went through a genocide. He's literally the last of
Right.
his culture. What I tried to do and what we tried to do in the show was like balance that darkness, the heavy side of life with, like you said earlier, like the hopeful side. So I don't want to leave readers super depressed at the end or super like hopeless that there's no way out. Like the book is, can be heavy at times, and I tried to, unlike Avatar, like this is a YA book based in reality. There's no magic, there's no fantasy elements. It's a very realistic sort of story. Uh, but I didn't. Yeah, I wanted to leave the reader with a sense of hope at the end that you're gonna always have this grief. You're gonna run up into these difficult life situations, but there are ways to make connections with others and find your way through it, and try to find a path forward.
Mm-hmm. Which I mean, I was telling my mom when I was reading the book, I was about halfway through, and my boyfriend has been watching me read for the last 4 hours, and he's like, what is that about? And I kind of gave him a synopsis of where I was, and he was like, yikes, like that's that's tough. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, you don't understand. Like something about it, you just have so much hope that things are going to get better.
Hmm.
And that carried out through the entire story. I had hope that, you know, his life would maybe not, fix, but he would
Yeah.
come to terms. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't even planning, I mean, full disclosure, which I told Mike before we started recording, I wasn't planning on reading it. I was really like, you know what? I didn't watch Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I have never been a person that is super into, not even super, I haven't been into animation at all. In fact, when we joke about it that my kids are like, remember such and such movie? And I'm like, no, I don't remember that movie. That was my digital babysitter. I was doing anything but watching that movie. I was with you people all the time. So
Yeah.
if you were plugged in watching a movie, I was somewhere else. And my younger son has been like making me watch his favorite movies, which I've actually gotten really into it. He's like, see, these are so good, but I have not ever been into animation, but all my kids are, and they haven't grown out of it. It seems to just even be intensifying. Like, and so I was like, Avery, come, you'll do this. We'll do this together. I don't need to read this book. So I read like the first chapter, and then Avery texted me yesterday morning and was like, okay, just so you know, the book's amazing. And I was like, guess I'm reading the book. So I spent yesterday afternoon binge reading the book, and it is so good. Like the story is so compelling. And I have watched a few like anime my younger son has been like, Mom, it's so deep. You would love the themes in anime. You've got to watch this movie. So I have now watched enough and I see what they're talking about. But what you did in this book about a 14-year-old, which I think is interesting, and I don't know if I can say this exactly the way, I don't know if I can be succinct about this, but I've been rereading some Judy Blume books lately.
Yeah.
Did you ever read any of the Judy Blume books?
I probably did when I was a kid. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been rereading them as an adult, getting a wild hair. And there's something, and Judy's books are like, she wrote them, it was pretty much like the 1970s. And this story, it takes place in the 1970s, correct? Was it the
Early
1970s?
80s.
Early
80s.
80s.
Close. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you
Which is when
referenced
I
the
grew
seven.
up. So, yeah.
Me too. Me too. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And so I'm seeing kind of a similar like I guess time frame as Judy's books, but I thought it was interesting the way the adults are conveyed in the story and the way the adults are conveyed in Judy's stories. These are stories written for kids. Um, the adults, most of the adults are not exactly the heroes of the story. I would
Right.
say some of them are more or less Darth Vader-esque, a lot of them. There's not, I mean, every once in a while you might have a Yoda pop up, like Rennie,
Yeah.
but yeah, like the adults are assholes in most of the stories that I've read that seem to become popular children's stories. It's like the adults just don't get it. Um, and I guess the thing that I find so interesting is that as an adult, when I'm reading these stories, and yours yesterday, it takes me so back to being a kid and remembering how I felt when it was like the adults just don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm like, I wish I would have watched I wish I would have watched Avatar with my kids when they were younger, right? So that when they went through those teenage years where they really felt like the adults just don't get it. Like we could have talked about that story. And like I'm reading both Here and Gone and I'm thinking, how many people do I know who have kids that are tweens and teens and they feel like the adults don't get it. And if
Mm-hmm.
their adult was reading this story, at least the adult could and if the kid was reading the story too, or they're watching something together, like what if the adult could then go back and reference like the mom in this story? There were so many times I was like, Mom, like what the fuck is wrong with the mom? Like,
Well, I mean, that's a super interesting observation. Like, I think the way I was approaching it was that all the adults are dealing with their own shit and sorry for saying that.
no, I just said that. I just
Yeah, yeah.
F-bombed. So you can say
All right,
whatever you want
cool.
now.
And so they're kind of in their own world and they're not connecting with their kids in the way that, we would hope us as parents would connect with our kids. So the kids are a little bit left on their own to figure stuff out. So I don't see them as being like super deliberately terrible, but they got their own, as you get older, you realize like, oh, my parents, for whatever reason, like they had their own issues that, they were trying to deal with. And obviously that stuff comes through in the generations and the kids end up, experiencing that as well. So what I was trying to show was like a picture of like the whole community is sort of dealing with these different aspects of grief and not doing it well, for most of the book. And then by the end, they start to make some connections and start to like have a little more empathy for each other. And another thing with the theme of grief too, that, in my research for the book, it was like, and in my own life, like you can feel like when you go through a loss or something, like you can often feel like my loss is the worst loss possible, or my grief is bigger than your grief. And it becomes this sort of like comparison almost. You're comparing yourself to other people. And since that's what I was imagining, these characters in their headspace is like they're just dealing with their own grief and they think their grief is the most important at that moment. So they're kind of blocking out other people in a way.
That was one of the lines I wrote down is no one's grief is unique. I thought that was
Yeah,
really powerful.
exactly.
I was so interested by the voice that the book is written. Like, do you remember being 14 that well? Because you nailed it. Like,
I don't, but
he, like, I just, even what my mom was saying, like, how the adults just don't get it, it felt more like there was almost this 14-year-old, like, film over the adults, and only the things that they said to him mattered.
yeah,
And you knew as an adult reading the book, like, oh, she's going through her own, the mom's going through her own grief, and she has bills to pay, and she's stressed out, and she can't connect with her kid. But it almost didn't matter because you're reading the book through a 14-year-old's eyes, and he doesn't give a
yeah,
shit. Like, he just
yeah,
cares how she's treating him. And the way that he, like, even the self-hatred that he felt was so 14-year-old, like how he jaded even his acts of kindness. Like, he kind of was like, well, I had selfish intentions, even though it was an anonymous act of kindness. And I just, how did you capture that voice? How did you draw on that 14-year-old's voice so profoundly?
Oh, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I think part of it is just my natural tendency is for writing for younger audiences. Like I've tried to write more adult stuff, and something about it doesn't click yet, or it hasn't clicked yet. And when I'm writing for a voice for a younger kid or a teenager, it just sort of flows. But yeah, I think as I was writing too, I was trying to remember like being a kid and being in my, I was an artistic kid drawing in my room, sort of introverted, like all the thoughts that were going on in my head that I wasn't voicing. I didn't know how to like express myself in that way back then. I'm sure that's still in my subconscious there, and able to draw on that kind of stuff. I have memories obviously of that time. Um, and most of them are good memories. I grew up in New England, so the book's set in Massachusetts. I grew up in Vermont, so I was drawing a lot on just kind of life back then in the early 80s. So like the kid, yeah, Jack in the book is like riding his bike all over town, and like that's totally what I would do. I'd ride to my friend's house and stuff, and like that was just a kind of normal thing, was like you'd ride a few miles, down to meet someone to get some ice cream or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
um so yeah, I think it is a bit, when you're writing, you do you're embodying the character, but you're also, drawing out parts of yourself to make it sound believable and realistic.
And I
My
appreciate that the story wasn't wrapped up in a neat bow at the end, you know?
Well, that's what I
Yeah.
was going to say.
Hmm.
This, I don't know, my brain's kind of going into this place of, you know, one of the, I think, battles of modern day parents and parenting professionals is there's this whole thing where everyone wants to pretend they're the perfect parent. Like they want to pretend to themselves, you know, they put all this nonsense out on social media. Like
Hmm.
nobody's really sharing how it's layered and it's messy, and there's something going on in my brain right now of it's almost like we've been thinking that we're supposed to raise kids over here in, you know, in this Western culture, um, as like according to this perfect plan and this perfect script. It's like a Disney movie, like
Right.
good versus evil. It's very
Hmm.
simplistic, you know. This is how to be a good parent. This is how to raise a good kid. This is how to be a bad parent. This is how to raise a bad kid. And it feels like your stories are bringing more of, an older sort of, a culture that's been around for much longer, like the concepts that are used, or taught through their whole cartoon culture in, the Japanese world. I don't know if it's the other Asian countries too, but I know it's in Japan because we were there recently and I saw it. It's like a huge part of their
Oh yeah.
culture. Being a human being is more layered, and and there are lots of different parts of all of us, and and so it's like we're so much of the book, it's told from that 14-year-old lens, and you remember what it was like being 14 and how you felt about your parents, and there's all this evidence about why all the adults are just like not getting it. But then as the story unfolds and moves on, it's like then you start to like see the adults as actual human beings more. And there were even parts where like he would soften about something and I was thinking, you should really let him or her have it because I was like, really, you're just gonna let him off the hook? That like I would have like let that mom have it. um but he was very forgiving, and it was like then all of a sudden he would like soften, and I don't know, I just felt like the characters had so many layers, and that's not what I'm used to reading. I mean, even in Judy Blume's books, like I loved her books, and her books, she also, it's not just going to wrap up in a nice neat bow.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like the characters had quite as many layers or as much depth as they did in this story.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and part of that too is drawing, like in the way we drew on Eastern philosophy, I guess for Avatar and stuff. I was looking
Mm-hmm.
more, I guess, Western philosophy for this one. Like I've read a lot of Stoicism, and that's like a philosophy that I connect with a lot. So Rennie, who's kind of like a mentor figure to Jack in the book, he talks about that a lot, and the idea that like we can't always control what happens to us in life, but we can control how we respond to it. So that's a theme that runs throughout the book, and Jack thinking like, oh, these terrible things have happened to me and life's unfair, and a very black and white view of the world of like, shouldn't good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And he sort of helps open his eyes to kind of more the more gray area of life, and that these things happen to everybody, and it's more about how you come to them and how you face them than the event itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. I liked the stoicism, but I also feel like doesn't it all connect? It's just like I do think it connects to a lot of the things that are taught in the Eastern culture. It might just be
Yeah.
in, different words are used, but I felt like conceptually it's kind of the same thing. It's like being
Oh,
one
for
with
sure. Yeah.
nature, mysticism,
Yeah.
believing in something way beyond yourself.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
was
I
reading.
appreciated the blending.
Yeah. I was
Go ahead.
just about the voice of the characters. Like I was reading like books like Catcher in the Rye, which I had read years ago, but I was like that's like a classic, such a classic young adult narrator voice, like such a powerful voice. So I was reading that and some other books about grief and loss and stuff, that helped sort of inform how I was approaching the writing of this, because it was also this isn't a spoiler, but the narrator, it's all first person, so it's all from Jack's point of view. So at times you don't know how much he's being honest, how much he's not. It's a very, much like Catcher in the Rye, it's like an unreliable narrator, and part of that is also like the mystery. There's a mystery kind of aspect to the book of like what actually there's a accident that happens in the beginning that kind of kicks things off, and Jack is being, and everyone is being very kind of talking around the accident and what happened that day. And so I think that's part of my bringing in things I've learned through writing for television and stuff, of like the way you guys described, like you started reading and you couldn't put it down. There are ways to like a mystery genre like sprinkled throughout, so that you want to find out what's going to happen in the midst of this sort of like coming of age, more literary type story.
It's funny that you said Catcher in the Rye was what you read, because when I was explaining the book to my boyfriend, I was like, it's giving Holden. Like, I was like, I know he's not being honest. Like, and it's
Yeah.
but it wasn't the sense that Jack was lying to the reader. It was more the sense of he's 14-year-old and that's his reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was communicated really well.
Yeah, and there's a lot about denial, how we can deny an event, we can deny our feelings about it, we can, and sort of retreat into our own bubble. And so that's also kind of woven throughout the story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I also think, I mean, I know parents come to me, one of the like most dreaded topics is death,
Mm-hmm.
and people get really freaked out talking to their kids about death. And if somebody close to them or in their family dies, I mean, it's like the dreaded topic. I just had a parent last week they were like, and my 4-year-old, he all of a sudden is talking a lot about death. And the grandma was saying, do you think there's something wrong at school? They were turning it into a whole thing. And I was like, okay, well, good thing we have audios about how to talk to your kids about death. Like kids are curious and they hear about a thing. And, but it's really interesting. I just had a grown man who is in his 40s, and he said he gets really activated by his daughter whenever she's mean to their dog. And he was like, I just get so incensed. And he remembered a story from when he was 4, and he kept having pets and they kept dying. He had like a cat that died. Then he had like 2 guinea pigs that died. And then it was like maybe a fish or something. And he remembers being 4 years old and saying to his mom, like, why does everything I love keep dying? And she didn't know how to talk to him or how to support him through it. And so now, as a 40-something-year-old man, he's like, I don't know why I'm so activated by my daughter whenever she is too rough with our dog. It's like something comes over me.
Right.
And we really connected it back to this whole idea of death. And I said, I mean, the circle of life, death, it's the for sure thing. Like it was for sure that we were all born, and it's for sure that we're all going to die, but nobody wants to talk about it. And I think when a subject that affects all of us is sort of off limits, or we don't know how to talk about it, it becomes such a big issue. And so I love that this was incorporated into the story. Death was incorporated into the story, but in a way that I just think you really can help a lot of people to kind of understand that, like, it doesn't have to be such a taboo subject.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I should mention too, like I'm a dad. I have twins, boy and girl, 8-year-old boy and girl twins. And yeah, I mean, probably when they were 4, since that, the talking of death thing sounds very familiar, where it's just something that either they've heard, or I think it's just human curiosity of like, where did I come from? First of all,
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm this little being, and where I just showed up in this world, and then where do we go after, and when we've had, my wife's father passed away last year, and so we have had some, moments of grief and death in the family. And yeah, we just try to just deal with it honestly and not try to pretend everything's okay, or, and talk about how we're feeling about it. I mean, I think I grew up in a house that was like loving, but not, we didn't talk about emotions, it was sort of an unspoken, love. So growing up, I didn't quite know how to, I think that's why I retreated into art and writing and storytelling and stuff, because that was a way to express myself that I didn't know how to verbalize it. And I still struggle with that at times, but I've gotten better. And so yeah, with our kids, we just try to put it all out there. I don't know. The kids are super smart. They're way smarter than I ever imagined. They catch on to
They
anything.
are. They're so smart. And I mean, that's why when I talk about like using stories like Both Here and Gone as a bridge, it's, you have a kid, let's say you have a death in the family, or let's say you have, I mean, this is going to be a story that somebody, an older kid has read. Maybe a 10-year-old, maybe a 10 or 11-year-old. Well, I don't know who did you really write this for? Like what age group?
Yeah, it was like middle grade to YA. I think those things totally depend on the kid and like what they're reading. Cause when I was a kid, I was reading like Stephen King in 5th grade, which
right.
Probably wasn't appropriate, but I enjoyed it.
Avery, at what age would you have been ready to read a story like this?
I mean, I probably would have read this in like 5th grade.
Yeah, I think so too. But you were reading Harry Potter in like 2nd grade.
Yeah.
But I think, so let's say if your kid is reading this, 5th grade, and then they ask you a question about death, or somebody close to you or them dies, all of a sudden we could refer to, remember that book that we read? Remember Rennie? Remember,
Yeah.
this? And it's like, remember that girl, Alyssa? Remember that character? What was that character's name? And all of a sudden we're referring to a story, and we're talking about really hard topics, but it makes it, that's where I am like, this is a tool that we could use, where it's like, we're not going to sit and like talk about our feelings necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that can get awkward. And a lot
Yeah.
of us weren't raised talking about feelings. We're not therapists.
Yeah.
um and it also gets awkward for our kids. But if all of a sudden we're talking about feelings, but we're talking about characters, and we're talking about a storyline,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that's a really cool way to get through some hard things and use story as a tool.
No, I love that. Because yeah, even with my son, who's we got an autism diagnosis for him, but he's a huge reader, and he's fully into the Percy Jackson universe and reading all those books. And so, like, yeah, if I try to ask him a question about how are you feeling or how was your day, or that, like, does not work. But if I talk to him about Percy Jackson and what Percy's doing or what the characters are doing, like, he can, he'll talk about Greek mythology all day long. So it is an amazing, I mean, I've always loved stories, but especially now with my kids, like, we still read every night before bed. And, I think, and seeing them now come into their own, and now they're reading their books on their own, is like a very proud parenting moment of like, all right, all those years of reading to them, are paying off now. And just seeing them, a love they have of like stories and storytelling is really cool.
Yeah, we were talking last week about the power of storytelling, and like in some ways, you can just like kind of make shit up, and it creates a more magical universe for your kids to communicate different themes and like things you want to impart upon them. But like, even I feel like with Avatar, personally, like finding a big theme for me in that show was finding the beauty in death. Like, I mean, Aang's whole people was genocided, and then it's about him experiencing their culture and rebuilding it. And like, Princess Yue has to sacrifice, but look the beauty that came from it. And I mean, when my grandma died, I drew on, for some reason, the celestial something about the stars. I had a whole spiritual thing, and it all connected to Avatar. I was like, oh my god, it's like Princess Yue. Um, but I don't know. I just think that stories are such a powerful way to communicate really intense themes. And Percy Jackson's my favorite series of all time.
Oh,
I was
cool.
about to say, Greek mythology and Percy Jackson. Maybe Avery has a taste of the tism, because
Yeah.
she sounds like she has a
Me and
lot
your
in
son would be
common.
friends.
She has a lot in common with your son.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. I mean, the entire neurodivergent population, I think, would say, um, yeah, like, bond with me over, like, please don't ask me what I'm feeling in this
Yeah.
body, because a lot of times it feels overwhelming and I can't even put it into words. And
Mhm.
so now all of a sudden, if we bond with them over this thing that they're really into, and they get to like talk about it, to me, I think that's empathy, because I think it's also not
Yeah.
pushing someone to perform according to your agenda that's going to make you feel better, like, oh, I don't have to worry about them as much, because I'm covering my bases as a parent talking about X, Y, and Z. It's like you're meeting them where they're at, and
Yeah.
where they're at is his nose is in a book, and he's really into these characters.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a definition of story that kind of is my mantra since I learned it, was like that a story is a single human mind trying to solve a problem. So like
Mm.
all these stories we watch or read, they're really just, it's like this psycho technology to help you solve a problem. So like if you think of like the genres you're interested in or things like that, like often those are will help you understand like what you're looking for, or like what meaning you're seeking. um for some reason I love crime mystery shows. I don't There's something about like figuring out. I used to love puzzles, like the whole like figuring out puzzles, making sense, like why does this
Mhm.
world doesn't make sense, and how do I make sense of it, and piece all these clues together to find some sort of understanding of it. Like that's
Wait,
definitely one
say
of my things.
this. It's a single mind. Wait,
A
say it
single
again.
human mind trying to solve a problem. So like the character, often we think of characters as like, oh, they seem so real, and they're, and while you're reading them, they can feel that way, but they really are avatars in the other sense of the word, not not the avatar of the show sense of the word. Um, they're just these psychological plays playing out in your head. Like none of this is real, but they help you sort of like process through um, thoughts or feelings or whatever. So I mean, it makes sense why people are constantly drawn to different types of stories. Can
Mm-hmm.
binge a episode, binge a series on Netflix. It's like you're trying to get some meaning out of the stuff, and some of much like I always like the analogy of food. Like there's some stories and shows and movies that are like very nutrient dense and can sustain you and give you like some good good fuel, and then some of it's junk food, and we all know what those shows are, and like, but you're still trying to find some sort of meaning or some sort of I don't know, guidance of like, how do I navigate this weird world? What does this character do? How do they do it? And did that
Mm-hmm.
turn out good for them in the end or bad in the end? Like, should I follow their example or not?
What would you say was the main problem that you were solving for Jack in this story?
Yeah, it was about coping with not just loss, but kind of uncertainty. Like, how do we cope with uncertainty when life doesn't make sense and is uncertain, and you've experienced this loss? Like, it is following him. Like, he's making a ton of mistakes. Everyone is, but by the end, you do see a potential path forward. So that was kind of
Mm-hmm.
the thing I kept thinking about as I was writing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's such an interesting take, taking from a character things that you want to embody. As a woman, I've been feeling frustration, and there's this series called Throne of Glass, my favorite,
Oh
now
yeah.
my favorite series. I've, you know, gone past Percy Jackson, but I don't know if you've read the series, but it's just about this like really strong female main character. And I think I've read it so many times, but I just in the past, like, it's kind of disgusting how much I've been reading it. But in like 2 weeks, I've finished the whole series again, and all
Oh
the
wow.
books are like 800. It's 800 pages each.
Yeah, yeah.
It's disgusting. But I was like, what am I trying to solve? And I was like, why am I reading this again? Why am I reading this again? And I think she has so much rage. And I was like, what is she doing with it? You
Mm.
know? And it kind of helped me shape it and realize it's not rage, it's sadness. And she's doing things to better the world. She's not just letting it consume her. And I kind of, embodied her character and her strength. And so it was interesting to hear that point of view.
Mm.
And for anyone listening to this far off in the future, it was just the 2024 presidential election. So that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so interesting. It's interesting to think, like, have you always been into crime dramas?
I guess mysteries in general. Like even though we created a fantasy show, like I wasn't super into fantasy growing up. That kind of came later in life. Like, but I do, some of the like books I remember having a huge impact on me as a kid was there's a book called Where the Red Fern Grows, which was kind
Oh
of a
yeah.
classic, and it's
Uh-huh.
about this boy and his dogs, and I still remember, like, it's one of the few books I remember crying when I was a kid. Like there's like I think the dogs die in the book somehow, and it's very sad, and so like I think of those, and I'm like, oh, yeah, there's something. Some of those have stuck with me, I think, even though I haven't read them, for years. But I usually read. I mean, I read some mystery stuff, but it's more, I guess you would call it literary or whatever. And now I missed out on like reading the classics. So like I had never read like Charles Dickens before. And I'm like, oh, this is why he's so popular. This is a really good book. David Copperfield's an amazing book. So like I'm kind of rediscovering or discovering for the first time, like long dead authors that are considered classics, but they're considered classics for a reason. And I think sometimes I read some of those things in high school and college, but I definitely appreciate them in a much different way now, not only as a storyteller, but just being grown up now and an adult and having lived some life. There's some really, really great books from the past. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Avery, do you have any sort of final questions? I know you had some prepared.
I have goober questions. First one, what element would you bend?
I'm clearly the airbender. If people could see this, I'm bald. The airbenders are bald. I've always been compared to Aang, so that would be my
It's a good
jam.
comparison. And then this one is more just like something that I've noticed. There's a lot of people who were, diehard fans of the original Avatar series and then had these criticisms for Korra. And I loved Korra. Like, I thought it was fantastic. I mean, she's so badass. How much of that criticism do you think was purely based on the fact that she was a female main character?
90%. There's definitely some of just, and it's just, I mean, it's anything with fandoms where it's like they love the original thing. If it deviates, we purposely tried to do something completely different from, or not complete, but like a different type of Avatar. So Aang is this 12-year-old reluctant hero, goofy kid, and we wanted like the brash, tough female who like wanted to be the hero. She was like going after it, and it was people around her saying like, you're not ready, that sort of thing. I mean, that's what I think any good story is like you see the character make these mistakes, and you can, as the audience, you're saying, that's not the right choice. But if they always made the right choice, I don't know that it would make a very interesting story. So, and yeah, I mean, Korra has a really cool journey that's very different from Aang's, evolution. So,
Yeah, and she felt almost less reliable than Aang, but except when she was like fighting, obviously, because you're like, she can beat up anyone. But yeah, he felt kind of always very wise, even though he was in the body of a 12-year-old. She was a little more chaotic, and I appreciated that. It felt more realistic. Yeah, I loved Korra.
Cool.
And then, parting question. I'm not sure if you can answer this, but there's rumors of the upcoming movie. Do you have anything to do with that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you what we're working on exactly, but the movie has been announced. And yeah, my job now is basically overseeing the Avatar universe as we grow it out. So we started a thing called Avatar Studios, me and Brian, and a lot of super talented people, with the goal of like expanding these stories out. So the first big project is going to be a feature film in 2026, and meanwhile, there's lots of video games. We have a YA novel series of like past avatars like Kyoshi, Roku, Yongchen. So those have been fun to work on. But yeah, it's a different role now. It's more like kind of creatively supervising things rather than like hands-on writing episodes and stuff like that. But it's a cool new challenge.
Cool.
But yeah, there should be plenty of new Avatar stuff in the coming years.
So. That's awesome.
Yeah, for the next generation.
And
are there going to be more books?
For me, I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's it's kind of like my side gig, is like doing my own writing. I mean, since my day job is more like I'm not going to say it's not creative because it's very creative, but I'm doing less of the hands-on creative work I used to do. So I still have that itch of wanting to write and stuff. So yeah, I'm going to keep writing, and hopefully people keep reading the books.
Well, it sounds like you've moved into the dad role. And
there's a lot of dadding happening too.
Yeah, so like you're the dad, you're the creative dad, and you've got all these creative kids, and they get to play, and you're like, okay, guys, time to wash up for dinner. But really, secretly, you're like, but I want to play too. So now
Totally.
you're
Yeah,
writing.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one last question.
Sure.
It did seem to me like Rennie, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the Rennie character obviously, turned out to be a beloved character. It seemed like there was a theme of like a lot of disappointing father figures, or there was a lack of male role models, a lack of male involvement with the kids. Like that seemed kind of like a theme throughout the book. And then Rennie showed up as like kind of this heroic figure who
Yeah.
served, in that role. And I was curious, like, was that very personal? Is that,
Like Iroh.
It's funny because we've also in Avatar, we have like not great father figures throughout.
yeah,
And we've been asked, like, both me and Brian, like, did you guys have like a rough childhood with your fathers and stuff? Like, we both had like very, very nice fathers, probably like a little bit absent, maybe kind of probably more like,
yeah,
the like Alyssa's dad who's working all the
yeah,
time, that sort of thing.
yeah.
So yeah, it's funny. I actually don't totally know where that comes from, but it does seem to be a pervasive theme throughout. But yeah, I think it is. But through my life, I have also had like teachers or mentor figures who have come in and, I think more on the like creative side, or, philosophical side. Like I had this high school English teacher who was this great guy who, I think got me excited about literature and stuff like that. So I think I draw on those figures too for the mentor figures. But yeah, it's funny, Avery, because there's someone left a review about the book, and it was about like Rennie's Uncle Iroh of this story.
That's what I was thinking while
yeah.
I was reading it.
So there's some common themes.
Yeah.
Yeah. War hero.
Yeah. And it makes sense to me because also like the 70s and 80s, I mean, it's like the Reagan era, and so many, I think, men, it was just, like I need to be providing for my family, and it was just, I mean, still, I think there's so much pressure on men, but I think at that time it was like my success, my self-worth is determined by how much I provide for my family. And so fathers were absent. And I'm seeing less and I still think there are there's a certain amount of absenteeism in many, many dynamics, but I feel like it's not like it was back then where that was just the norm. Like, raising kids was the mother's job and dads were busy. They were at work. They were doing more important things. Right. And so, so I just noticed that theme. I was like, well, thanks, Mike. So how can we'll include the link, but what's the best way for people to get the book?
You can, it's available on Amazon. So you can go search the book, Both Here and Gone, on Amazon. You can get an ebook or paperback. You can also, all my other stuff, including the book, is on my website, which is my full name, Michael Dante Dimartino.com, Dimartino with an I. And you can buy if you don't want to shop at Amazon, you can buy the paperback from my website directly. So, and I hope people check it out. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I hope people check it out too. Awesome. All right, thanks. And everyone have a great week. Bye. Thanks for listening today, guys. I hope you picked up some tips, tools, maybe some baby steps for creating more balance and boundaries in your life. And I just wanted to let you know, if you want to continue moving the needle forward in creating this for yourself, having a happier household, I want you to go to my website and check out mastermindparenting.com. We have 3 beginning programs, and if you need some accountability and more support, then please look for the one that would be a good fit for you. And as always, we're on all the social channels under Mastermind Parenting. On Instagram, it's mastermind_parenting. And, periodically I do pop up on different Instagram lives, Facebook lives, where I give you teaching and coaching, and I love engaging with you live. to help you help your strong-willed kids so that they can feel better, because when they feel better, they do better. And I love, love, love getting to know you guys. So thanks for listening. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Super, super appreciative.